to my business school classmates, I always thought I was out there on the deep end of the pool and the creative side. At the same time, I cannot deal with unhinged creativity. You know, hippie Burning Man people out there. Don't get me wrong, I actually really like Burning Man. But that's not design and thinking to me either. Right? So D-School was a great combination of those two to make a process around creativity and innovation. And what you'll find with all of the faculty here at the D-School is everyone comes from a very diverse background. And no one was raised and trained in design thinking. In addition, everyone's a practitioner. So very few people here stayed in academics, got a PhD in design thinking, and are now teaching here. And everyone went into the real world, applied these concepts, did something with it, and then came back. You know the story about Silicon Valley, right? In Silicon Valley, everyone writes a business plan on a napkin. So this is our business plan. What you don't know is this is the 117th edition of our napkin. And instead of going through this word by word, what I want to emphasize is that to us, design thinking is all about you as the innovator. It is not about the innovations. It's about you, the person, the creator. A lot of happy people outside. Wait, we can compete. Let's give a little woo ourselves. I like healthy competition. That's also why I went to business school. So one concept that we have about creative innovators is this idea of creative confidence. So, out of all of you, raise your hands again if you think you're creative. Oh, nice. So that's about 30–40%. If I asked that question to a classroom of kindergartners, what do you think would happen? 100% of kids would raise their hands. Yeah, so why the difference? What happened? School happened. Yeah, I think you're right. And it's not just school, but how we think about education. Right? There's something about education that emphasizes so much the analytical side that it makes us feel that we're not creatively confident, which isn't true. So there's a lot that what we do at the D-School is nurture that confidence so you can rediscover the kindergartner inside yourself that liked to draw and liked to play with Play-Doh, and if I said create a lizard out of tissue paper, you'd say sure. Okay. That kind of attitude about creativity is what we're trying to instill in all of our innovators. We also focus on real projects. This is not about theory. Notice that I mentioned again, everyone that teaches here is a practitioner. Went out to the real world and did something. They didn't research it, they did it. And so even in how we teach, we always have our students do real projects. So you are all going to do a real project today as well. That goes along with experiential learning. So experiential learning is about learning as you do. This is the most that you're going to hear someone standing and talking to you in any D-School class. For the most part, we throw you in, say do it, you fail at it, but then you come back out and you say, I get it now. I know what works and I know what doesn't work. But you have to learn by doing. It's experiential. And so, what is innovation? A lot of us think of innovation as an event. Right? Oh, this great company created a great product. Maybe this is an innovation to you. We think about innovation as a process. as a design process. And this is the process. So we always starting out with empathize. Empathy. What does empathy mean? To put yourself in someone else's shoes. What else? To look for similarities, to share something with someone, to understand someone else. So key point here in walking in someone else's shoes and understanding someone else is when you empathize, you are understanding a design problem from someone else's perspective. You are never designing for yourself. Okay, how many of us are guilty of when we buy, let's say, birthday gifts for our spouses? We buy something we want. Okay, that's the classic thing you don't do when you're a designer. You're not designing for yourself, you're designing for someone else. So in addition to empathizing by sharing something with someone else, I think observation is another key point about empathy. So as an example, I observed as a first thing in this room that you all sat down. And that was actually very interesting to me, and it was unprompted at the very beginning. So I would dig into that because of an observation. That's where I started. A lot of us are very used to being in someone's face, right? Moving very quickly, especially in the US. It's part of our nature here. If I said, figure out what, let's figure out what this woman is thinking right now, right? Instead of observing what she's doing, we would immediately walk up to her and say, excuse me, what are you doing? Okay. That's our instinct. But if you take a step back, you observe, you're going to find little interesting nuggets that are going to be very powerful beginning points. Another thing about empathize is it's human-centered. So when we start with a human, we are not starting with a solution in mind. We're starting with the person in mind. So again, drastic differences. One example of this is an iPhone. So before an iPhone existed, if you had walked up to a person and say, what are you looking for in a telephone? No one would have described this. But if you put that aside and just talk to a person and say, tell me how you communicate, you're going to get to something much more interesting. So you started with the human side. That's empathize. Define. What does define mean to you? Putting limits and constraints. Describing something. What else? Focusing on something specifically. Great. So one thing I noticed about you in your first answer is you used your hands like this. And I love that because how I define is to reframe a problem. Reframe it. And that's exactly what you were doing. So notice that you started wide with empathy, gaining a lot of information, understanding someone's perspective, and then you're focusing and you're narrowing down into define. Define is the stage at which you focus into one problem statement that you are going to solve for. It's very intentional that we separate out the widening, which we call flare, from the focusing, which is the narrowing. And you'll see that throughout this process. So the next stage is ideate. How many of you have been in brainstorming meetings before? Yeah, all of us have. I see some knowing smiles out there, right? Because probably those have sucked. Almost as much as you guys sucked as listeners at the beginning today. Trust me, I'll stop picking on you. So ideate is coming up with a lot of ideas. And there's some tools that we use around ideation that help flare. So I'm going to make you think about those ideation meetings that you've had, those brainstorming meetings that you've had before, and tell me why they sucked. Sometimes you have team members that are single-minded, so they shut any other idea out. They shut it down. What else? What makes other brainstorming sessions negative? Yeah, people are going off in different tangents all off on their own. There's no single direction or building on other people's ideas. Yeah.
There's no follow-up in a lot of these ones. So you sit there and you brainstorm, you come up with 1,000 ideas, and then it's done. You don't know what happens after.
Yeah, there's no follow-up after the brainstorming, right? So you have all these great ideas, now what? And that's really discouraging. We're going to take a quick break and again move forward just a little bit. We've got some people sneaking in the back.